Hello. People still coming into the room. It always takes a minute once you click the admit all button. And there's still people joining us. It's one of those funny things where I was like, hey, who wants to actually ask some questions about the nursery? It's this little tiny project. And apparently lots of people, because it's probably been the highest response rate of any of the various online things I've posted. Apparently everybody wants to grow lots of itty bitty little plants. All right, so this really is going to be more of a Q&A than a full presentation. That's sort of why I wrote the blog, because that way it's easy for people to go back to and to take a look at. And the nursery project overall is also, it's a small thing that's still in the trial and error stage. I was pleased with how everything went first year, enough that I'm scaling up a bit, although only so much, because I think we need more solutions that are less scalable and more replicatable, because often when we scale things, then their sustainability starts to drop off because we have fewer opportunities to stay hyper-local and to cycle things locally as our area of service gets bigger and bigger. I'll just give it another sort of 1 to 2 minutes. Let's set up. This is being recorded because, oops, clicked the wrong button. Let me just almost kicked somebody out of the room instead of let them in. This is being recorded because quite a few people did ask if it would be, and also some people weren't able to make it live. So I did say I'd record it, and then I'll share the link to the recording to I'll put it in the blog post, and I'll mention that on the Facebook post as well, or the Facebook event. So for those of you who are like, I don't want to be on camera asking a question, you are welcome to enter it in the chat box if you've got questions for me. If you don't mind being involved in a live Q&A that's being recorded, then by all means sort of unmute and turn on your video and ask questions. It is nice to actually have a conversation as the person who's doing the talking. And you spend a lot of time talking to a presentation screen and not actually to people. So this one's going to be formatted a little bit more like actually talking to people. And yes, I see there was one happy customer there in the in the chat box from the last year's seed sales. And I'll do a really quick sort of rundown on a couple of things, and then if you've got questions, I would very much like to hear them, because I might not think of everything that might be of interest to you. So the nursery project sort of started because the fall of 2020, I like planted all the seeds, and you know, that's one of those things where, like a lot of gardeners, in a lot of ways, I went a little bit overboard on planting all of the seeds. So I had lots of them stratifying in the fridge, and my 2021 spring plans, like many of us, were somewhat disrupted by COVID. So some teaching I was planning on doing, I decided it was going to start this coming spring, not last spring. So I had some flexibility and some time, and I decided to actually make a little bit of a business run doing the nursery, just because I had been growing things and giving them away, but just not at this scale before. So I had lots of seeds coming along. I had a grow rack. I had that little 6 foot by 8 foot greenhouse space. It's unheated. And so I ordered some extra seed trays, and I went, okay, will people buy seedlings that are like this big, and you know, for $1? So there was that sort of, it's very small and you have to take care of it, but you don't have to, but there's not a lot of cost. And you know, how will they do? Will people be able to care for them? It's not a huge risk to try a few, and I actually got really good feedback. People lost a few here and there, which is understandable. They're itty bitty little plants, But all in all, there was actually a lot of success. A lot of people were really pleased with how they did. And actually, I was pretty impressed with some of them as well. Just going to do a quick screen share. I'm just going to pull this over here. So when I did my photo shoot to show people what they were getting, because I wanted to be really clear about the size of the seedlings that I was providing. So I set up this little photo shoot with them out of their plug trays, and the plug trays are sort of shallow. They're the half, you have to put them in the half height flats for them to actually sit flat. So they're only about 1.5 inches deep. And so that's why I set it up with the ruler, and I did the photo shoot to show people this is the size you're getting. And I wrote up a whole thing going, they're really small and they require care. And then I went and I did exactly what I told people not to do, which was I rolled them up and I left them rolled up in their little paper wrapper for a few days. They were facing up, like that was the little wrapper. I rolled them up and they were standing upright, and I had them under the lights and I watered them. But I left them in it for like 3 days because I didn't have a garden spot to put them right into. But then I was out to the country spot and I tucked them in the ground. So they sat for like 3 days, and then I put them into a spot that I'm only ever out to every couple of weeks, or a couple of times a week. So they didn't get watered every day, which is what I told people to plan for watering every day. And by the end of the summer, the coreopsis was about the size you would get out of a gallon pot. And I didn't do anything with it other than water it a couple of times a week. The penstemon that was in there did the same sort of thing. Like it wasn't quite a gallon pot size, but it was sort of next to it. And actually the Artemisia that was in that photo shoot grew up and bloomed. And so this is all seedlings that were plugs in the spring. And I think this photo was August. Yeah, August 28th. So they were started as seedlings. And, you know, these are seedlings that, you know, this is the size stuff was on April 9th. So April 9th, I actually took a whole bunch of photos. Just going to scroll through these a little bit to show you just how small stuff was on April 9th. And this was mostly out in the unheated greenhouse. So it was fairly cool conditions. And you can see, you know, these were really tiny, and I do handle them small. I'll show you a couple of photos of that as well. But quite small plants on April 9th. And they were the ones that were in the plant sale at the end of May. So the Seedling Sale, and the biggest sort of send out that picture with the that's as the start of this. It was for the event. That was my big packing day because I had a whole bunch of pickups scheduled for sort of a 2-day period right at the end of May. That was, I think, May 31st. See, I take photos, that's how I keep records. So it's May 31st. And it was just sitting out on my back deck with the list of the plants to pack up and putting together the orders for pickup over the next 2 days. And, you know, they were barely coming up on April 9th. The sale, most of them went out the last couple of days of May. There were some pickups before that. And then how I sort of got up to that 5,000 number that I tend to toss around is after the sale went, I actually took a whole bunch of those trays again, and I still had seedlings in the little dense pots. And I went and I refilled the trays actually with some more of those. I separated them out and refilled the trays, and then those were the ones I actually, some of them went into my own nursery beds, and some of them went to some of the community projects that I donated seedlings to. And so that's how I was able to do both rounds of it. Or able to do that many seedlings in sort of that limited a space it was actually a couple of rounds of them. There was the first batch that went out in the sale, and then the second batch, if I had coddled them, and I must admit I didn't because I was busy, I could have actually taken that second batch and sort of gotten them growing out well enough that they would have been good sized plants for fall sale. They took a little while to get out to the fall sale, which is, you could have easily, if you were tending them actively, gotten them up to sort of a $6 or $8, even for a late plant sale size. And I think the spring, if you planted them right out into nursery beds at the start, you could, they're easily $10 to $12 sort of retail plants. And I'm saying this because I know there's some people in the room who are thinking about doing things like this for clients. The thing with handling them, let me open the right, is the transplant size that I actually tend to work with is I get them through the germination stage. Soil medium, yeah, it's ProMix. It was the seedling mix I used. And for the coreopsis, which is what this is, you could just get away with regular potting soil, but some of those really tiny ones, you can get away with, or you want to use the seeding mix because it's fine. And what I tend to do is, if I can, I get them when they're they're even at the cotyledon stage often, or at least it's just the first leaf, because they're not very tangled together and they're easy to pick up individually and handle because the roots sort of separate easily. So you can see I seed them quite densely in those 3-inch pots, and they get taken out of the pot, tossed on a plate. And in my dining room, because I sit and do this in the evening and listen to audiobooks, and I separate them out. So you just when you get them early enough, there's not a lot of untangling them. You can just pick them up, and they sort of come loose. And I have 2 magic tools. One is a metal chopstick. That's what I use to open the hole in the tray to put them in. You can use whatever sort of fine, not sharp implement suits you. We happen to have metal Korean chopsticks in the kitchen drawer, and there's always 1 or 2 living on the dining table when I'm going through my spring seeding. And you make a little hole, feed the root down in it, and then once I've done up a bunch, I water them. Here's my other magic tool. The little nozzles that you can get, they come in sets, and there's 3 or 4, and it's from Lee Valley Tools, and they're these little fine rows. So it's like, that's not you, it's fuzzing it out. The really fine rows, little watering things, because they don't flatten or wash out the seedlings. And so you can sort of go through and water the whole tray with that, and it just gets them settled in. And while people will say you can't move things when they're that young, I have very nearly 100% success rate with these seedlings handled like this. So you really don't need a lot of, you don't need to fuss a lot, as long as you don't wash them out with too much heavy water, like heavily pouring water over them until they've had a few days to settle in and perk back up, and just handle them carefully. And you can actually grow a lot of plants in a small space. And this is a 128 cell tray, and there's still some left from that 1 pot that I started. So it does go pretty far. This is one, it's a much smaller seedling, same sort of process. The roots weren't actually as deep in the pot, so they only went down about halfway when we pulled them out at this germination stage. But same thing, lay them out on a plate, pick them up 1 by 1, and then feed them in. This is how many were left in each pot after I filled 128 cell tray from each of those pots. So that's like 252 plants. And that's them under the light sort of the next day. So they get a little bit flattened right when you put them in and you water them, but as long as you don't get soil all over them, they perk right back up. And same thing, even the really tiny ones are often stuck just through water tension to the soil when they first get watered in, but then they perk back up once they've been under the lights for a couple of hours. So it's usually the next day. And again, this is sort of stuff that's what size a lot were at the start of April. That's really when most of the germination started. Some I had seeded a little bit earlier. And same thing, they actually are a little bit more work to untangle the roots if you do them too early. Or sorry, if you leave them too long. I actually used to leave them until I had a couple of true leaves, but I found They survive the transplant at the cut-that-in stage just fine. And so the only ones that I leave a little bit longer are the super tiny ones I have trouble holding. So lobelia would be a good example of that. The seeds are dust fine, and the seedlings aren't much bigger. So they're just too small to handle. And actually and I mentioned this in the blog post, the milkweeds that I stratified in the fridge and then I seeded them directly into the plug trays. This is them germinating out in the unheated greenhouse, and they were already up. Keeping in mind last spring was really early, really warm. So they were up to this stage by April 12th. And that's sort of where a lot of the other seedlings were. I'm being a little bit more cautious on overseeding, like putting in too many seeds too early. This coming year, I'm going to start a week to 2 weeks later, because last spring was very early, and so I got away with just a couple of cold nights where I tossed some plastic sheeting over these for some extra protection at night out in the greenhouse. I don't want to risk doing it too early this year. And so that same sort of batch of plants these are all sort of into their plug trays. That's them 20th of May, which is when a lot of the sales were happening, around there. Yeah, and then May 31st, as I said, was the big packing day. This is I potted some of the ones that were left either in the pots. I separated them out and did another batch. Just going to come back to the comments in just a second. I separated them out into ones that were still packed together into the little pots. They'll actually hold amazingly long at that stage. I've had them hold for a couple of months, where they sort of grow and then they sit there and they're like, I'm out of space. Like, I need more space, and they sort of pause. But if you separate them out, they go back to growing. So they're pretty forgiving. And so I grew them out. I got some compost out of my backyard composter. They've been sitting there for ages, and I screened it, and I actually used that because it had old potting soil tossed in as well. It was light enough. I put that into some of the trays that I had that were sort of more like 72 trays, and grew some things on and then planted them out. So this was July 1st. So again, those same seedlings that were just tiny dots. That's one of the photos I showed that was just seeds coming up on April 9th was tip of my tongue, New England aster. And this is the New England asters right there in the middle of the tray. So that would have been like a 50 cell tray. Just a chintzy one that I got secondhand, because I salvage things like that and I have access to them, and I tucked them out into the garden, and some went right into meadow. And actually these were swamp milkweed, which were late plant outs and were still this big in August as first year seedlings. So that tray, one of those trays of milkweed seedlings, this is them. I think that's most of the points I wanted to make sure everybody was sort of up to speed on and knew how I did things. So I'm going to open up the chat. And what are your favorite books that have guided you? Here's the funny thing. The books I find are actually behind, although there's more coming out, but there's also so much regionality for plants that sometimes you have to rely on some of the internet resources that can be more specific, because it's a combination of, there are so many native plants. So sometimes people are like, well, there's just not as much to work with. I have to draw on the introduced species. And again, I'm saying this as somebody who worked as a professional landscape designer for 18 years. I have designed those landscapes that are full of non-native plants. And it's only the last few years that I've really sort of had to go, wait a second, there's a lot more available. It's not just Rudbeckia and Echinacea and Amelanchier. There's so many plants, and that's also where I sort of got to jump in with both feet this year when I went. I decided I was going to try to really expand the offering list, and I went through the Prairie Moon website page by page and ordered a lot of plants. So as far as resources, VASCAN has been a wonderful resource. VASCAN, it's a Vascular Plants Canada database. So I can look things up and find out where they're from. There's surprises both on the, oh, that is native, and oh, I thought that was native and it's not, side of things. So VASCAN is really useful for checking. There's birdgarden.ca, which is actually a site that should be known better, which actually lists a whole bunch. You can buy your ecozone as opposed to by province. Birdgarden.ca is a good resource. So you can go and find your ecozone on the map, and it'll give you a whole bunch of plant recommendations. It's by no means all possible native plants for that area, but it's a really good starting point. To get ideas, yeah, the Prairie Moon Nursery is sort of a great website to go and dream about because you can see all the plants. And I actually sat this fall with the Vascan site open and the Prairie Moon, because Prairie Moon sells native species from all over North America. So I was checking, what's native to Ontario? And I got an awful lot of those. So all in, I'm germinating, or hoping to germinate. I'm planting. I won't have 100% success, and that's something I'm fine with. About, I counted it, or I checked, it was 157, and I literally do have spreadsheets for this stuff. 157 Ontario native species that I'm starting from seed between last fall seeding up to the seeding I'll do in the spring. And I use Prairie Moon a lot for looking up germination requirements as well. So yeah, I rely heavily on websites. Another website is the Missouri Botanical Garden, their plant library. It's by no means all native, but it was the first one I ever came across that actually went, this is where a species originates. They put that information in, just the information on, they write it up just like a garden plant description. And so they treat the native plants like garden plants when they're describing them, because a lot of resources you'll find that are about native plants are actually about going out into an area that is not under human cultivation at the moment and telling you what to look for in those spaces to find these plants and things like that. But they don't actually tell you about how they would do in a garden setting. And the Missouri Botanical Garden website does do that, their plant database. So it's also a really useful resource. Did anything flower at the nursery? Like, did they bloom? I planted them out before, like they didn't stay in these sizes for very long. In the nursery beds, I did have the lobelias actually started to bloom the first year. And I know a lot of people who did get the first round, because I mostly planted out second round, there were quite a few plants that did bloom the first year for people. So yeah, I sell them. I take the question is, are you selling them out of plug trays wrapped in paper? Yes, I literally take them out. I lift them out with a kitchen knife. So much of this works. Like if I didn't have a kitchen, I wouldn't have this. I lift them out of the trays with a kitchen knife, just a butter knife, because the plug trays, that's the easiest way to lift them out. You don't have to damage the tray, just slide down the side, lift it up. I lay them out on the paper. I write the labels onto the slices of milk carton with them, and with each clump I'll lay labels. And if there's two species, like if there's two Monardas in an order, I'll make sure they're not near each other so that when they unroll them and they don't get mixed together. But literally I just lay them all out and then I roll the whole thing up in paper, and then if there's multiple bunches for an order, I'll put them together. I save like the clamshell containers that you get fruit in now, grocery stores. I save clementine boxes. I have like this collection that is now really starting to build up. So for the spring sale, so I can put them all into containers when it's clusters of things. But yeah, they go out, they're $1 each. And like I can fit 100 plugs in a clementine box. I have a photo of that. Where's the photo? There it is. Actually, I think there was 98 in this order. So this is 98 native plants, all wrapped up in paper and tucked in one of the cardboard clementine boxes. And part of the reason I actually took this photo was because there's so little non-renewable material there for so many plants. And even the potting soil, like I used up just over 1 bale of Pro Mix for the nursery last year for that 5,000 plants. So it's minimizing inputs. Moisture concern in the plastic greenhouse. Actually, I don't have a plastic greenhouse. The greenhouse is actually glass. It's actually half a shed. The south side of my shed in my backyard is a 6 foot by 8 foot. I don't like to close things in too tightly because you're right, you can get moisture issues with like you'll start to get mold if you close things in too tightly. And I also find the temperature fluctuations on a hot day and something that's closed too tightly can actually get too extreme. Once it starts to get warm, I actually keep the door between the greenhouse side and the shed side propped open, so that it just has, it can only get so hot before it sort of just heating the shed. So as far as moisture goes, it's not usually that big a deal. And I just, because my grow rack is really only 12 flats in the house, it's not kicking that much moisture into the house. And I know I have to water daily. Where did I get my trays? I ordered my seeding trays from, tip of my tongue. I did order them in William Dam Seeds. That's it. I'm here going, I literally have their catalog sitting in my living room right now. So I ordered the plug trays and the half height trays, the ones that hold the water. You need those for the plug trays to sit flat. And if you can sit them flat, then you can bottom water. So I do top water, but you can also sort of lift up the edge, pour a bunch of water in the tray, put it back down, and all the cells will get watered. If you put them in the full height trays, they sort of dip, and the ones around the edge don't get any moisture. So somebody did ask me, how do you protect them once you put them into the plug trays? If you don't have a spot to put them, grow them later. So this is and this is a fair question. So if you're going to if you're trying to grow things out, you don't have to force them on early. If you winter sowed them outside, leave them outside until they start to come up. And then once they come up, like they're already acclimated to the outdoors, the outdoor temperatures. Native plants are perfectly capable of handling our native conditions, our temperatures in the spring. So just grow them outside. And then when you put them up into the plug trays, keep growing them outside. When you do that though, squirrels are your biggest challenge. Did I bring that photo over? Oh, I don't know if I did. It's in the blog, but I don't think I actually put it in my little quickie full because I put together a folder of pictures I thought I'd use. On the patio, I have a couple of frames. My husband does a certain amount of sort of woodworking, and I can put in orders now and then. There's a picture. So I can go, I need this, and he'll make it for me, usually out of salvaged bits off of other projects. And so there's just plastic bird netting stretched over this, over these frames, and that's enough. It keeps the squirrels and the raccoons out. Because there's nothing in here they particularly want, they would just flip things over and look under them and dig through them for the fun of it. So that's what I use to protect them when they're out on the patio. Where you can get plug trays for reasonable price. Well, the William Dam is about the best. Do okay outside without it? Yes. So that's my comment about this. Put them outside. If you don't have an indoor space, they'll still do. How do I figure out how many seeds I had space I have time for? I'm entirely excessively optimistic. And I probably still planted too many, but I planted fewer this year, and I made a point of giving a lot away to the Ottawa Wildflower Seed Library to keep myself in check when it came to planting time, because it's really easy to overplant. I actually did quite a bit of, somebody asked, have you considered winter sowing? I actually did quite a bit of winter sowing this year. I still did it in the individual pots where I sort of tight pack them, but they are actually outside getting the winter exposure, because I do put a lot of seeds into coffee filters, write the name of the plant on it in indelible marker, because pencil becomes unreadable once they get stained with the seeds and they've been in the fridge for a while. And I put in a little glass casserole dish with a tight fitting lid, I put 55 species of seeds in the fridge the other day for their 2-month stratification. So some, especially ones that require light exposure, I went ahead and I did winter sowing. What I did was I put them in the pots, but then I'd put them either in like I had some old vinegar containers, the plastic ones, so I cut them up and did that sort of winter sowing thing, but I actually put them in pots inside that, or I had some of the clamshell containers. So again, just to protect them from getting blown away or extreme fluctuations, it gives them a little bit of extra protection to hold on to moisture in that. So the pot, I did winter sow, but a little bit adapted so that I can also, if I want to hurry some of them along, I can bring them in, or I can leave them out there until they start to come up, and then I'll separate them into plug trays. Yeah, so somebody asked about cold moist stratifying in the coffee filters in the fridge. Literally, I decide how many seeds I want to plant. As I said, I'm still probably still planting too many. I put them, I'll usually write on the coffee filter first while it's empty. I write using an indelible ink marker. There's some fine tipped ones you can get. There's Stidadler, I think that's how you say it, from Staples is where I get them, and they come in 2 packs anyway. They're fine tip indelible marker. I write on the coffee filter. I just put the seeds in, and I fold it up so that they're on the inside. And then before they go in the tray, I try into the casserole dish, I try to sort of shake them so it's a little bit spread out in that area, because that makes them easier to handle when I am ready to plant. And then I'll lay them down, just to dampen them. I basically put out a plate, put some water in it, and wet them, and then let them drain a little bit and put them in the casserole dish with a tight, it's got one of those clip-on lids, and they go in the fridge, and I put a note in my calendar for when they need to come out. For long stratification plants, I do usually make a point of checking them, starting to check them about once a week, about halfway through. So the 60-day ones recently went in. I'll start checking them at about 30 days. Just in case there's some early germination. And I'll check them about once a week. I'll just go through, and you can usually see some germination. And then when I'm ready to plant, I'll open it up. Some I'll need to mix with a bit of the potting soil and that, so I'll sort of scrape them off, mix them with a bit of potting soil, and spread them across the surface of the pots. And do those densely planted ones. For ones that are a little bit easier to handle as individual seeds, I'm actually going to put them right into plug trays this year, or soil blocks. I'm going to be playing with those a little bit, so that there isn't a transplant step. So somebody asked, are you obliged to pick and pack everything all in one day? I actually make people, when people put in an order, I make an appointment, and I only book as many as I know I can pack. Like if it's afternoon and evening pickups, I'll only book as many pickups as I can fit into a morning of packing. So as far as how many I need to pack, I only do what I can handle. And then I say, no, that day's booked up for pickups. Here are your other options. William Dam Seeds, somebody asked about the name of it. And somebody else answered. Perfect. Claudette Sims, dance. Yes, I like it when people actually answer. So pricing for any sales to other gardeners, etc. So if somebody actually wants to buy sort of whole trays and multiple trays, we can talk about that. There isn't a huge markup when you think about the time of sort of handling the individual plants, and a lot of these is gathering seeds, doing the stratifying, potting up, or like doing stratifying, putting them into the containers for germinating, then putting them into the trays, and then handling them for selling. If I don't have to do the extra handling stage, if I can actually make up trays and not have to then pack them, because you'll take the tray and plant them in, bringing my tray back. Sorry, sore point from last year. Some people didn't bring trays back. And I don't like buying new stuff just because it's more plastic. Then yeah, I can talk about a bit of a markdown, but also they are only $1 each. That is getting into sort of wholesale pricing already. Where do I buy my Pro Mix bales? I usually just buy them at Richie's Feed and Seed. I'll go in, the one on Windmill Lane always has stuff. I'm sure they're fully stocked now. I actually still have one bale of the potting soil, not the germination mix, left from last year, because I thought I was going to need another, and I ended up not. So I have a full bale from last year that's been stored out in the shed. And then I I will probably end up picking up one more bale of the seeding mix. And thank you for your plants look super healthy. I try. Part of why they're healthy is they're held for a very short period of time. Really, we're talking a matter of like 6 weeks. So there isn't a lot of time for pest or disease buildup. I don't have a greenhouse that is kept year round full of plants. It's just a spring thing. So it doesn't tend to have the accumulation of pest or disease loading that you get sometimes in year-round greenhouses. And I do have a few house plants, but I must admit, I keep debating whether or not I'm going to rehome them out of sympathy, because I'm really good at nurturing things for a limited period of time. And then I tend to have this attitude of, okay, you're all set. You're good on your own from here on out. Except that doesn't work with house plants, and then I end up ignoring them for like August and September, especially when I'm harvesting lots from the vegetable garden and I'm very busy with all of that, cleaning, processing, everything. And they get really sad if you don't water them for a month and a half. And also they do tend to be a haven for, if there's any pests, they like to sort of hang out on the houseplants until they get the seedlings are back. So I've got them physically separated, but I may actually go, does anybody want houseplants? They're gonna need their leaves washed, but hey, they're lovely citrus. And send them out into the world so that I don't have any chance of various plant-eating critters surviving in the house year to year, so that I don't have to deal with pest issues. Yes, when will I be posting a list of my plugs for this year? Honestly, once they germinate. I won't say a species is available until it germinates. I do in the blog have a link to the list of the plants I think have high chance of being available. So there is a link in there to a spreadsheet. It's just a Google document of the plants that I think have a high likelihood of being available. There's some that I'm planting that I think are iffy. There's some that I'm planting that I don't expect to germinate for 2 years, because that's the thing with some native species. And there's other ones where there's just very few seeds that come in a pack and they're new to me. And I expect that by the time I plant the ones that I'd like to have in my garden, and then some of the other places I'm tending where I expect I'd be able to go in and gather seeds from in future years, there might not be plants available. So those ones I also didn't include on that list. So that list of, I'm starting 157 species. That list has about 120 something on it. And I would expect, just by what may and may not germinate and what might grow too slowly and it won't be ready to go out, there'll probably be about 100 species of Ontario native plants that I'll be able to offer this spring. And there was only maybe 30 that I offered last spring. So it's a much longer list. And part of the reason I did that was because I keep encouraging people to plant a diversity of species together, because a lot of our gardens will have a species and a species and a species. And it is good to plant in clusters so that there's enough of a particular species of plant for pollinators to get their fill by coming to that patch and collecting what's ready right then. So that guideline of planting sort of 5 to 7 species, or 5 to 7 plants of a given species is great, but it doesn't actually need to be a monoculture planting. Even within that group, you can actually have them spread out just a little bit more. And then a lot of plants are used to growing in a mixed community, and those mixed communities very often include grasses, and they include some of the lower, sort of less showy plants. And that's why in that Facebook series I'm doing, A Winter of Native Plants, I'm tagging some things as hashtag native ground cover. They're not just meant to be sort of masses of ground covers. Those are species that actually fill in that ground layer niche around other species of plants, the taller or the showier ones. I think those are missing from so many of our native plant gardens in general, but if we're going to do native plant gardens, let's actually fill in as many of the ecological niches as we can. And also, there's a very limited range of grasses that are usually offered by native plant growers. They're sort of the most photogenic, most commonly known, very often the ones that have actually also been developed into cultivars, but they might be selling the species. But there's actually a lot of different grasses. And so I went through the Prairie Moon site and I picked out a selection of Ontario native grasses and 3 sedges to give a shot at this year and see how they do for sales, and also because I want to plant more Ontario native grasses in my own gardens. So expanding the ecosystem plants, not just the flowery ones. And then there's a whole bunch of really flowery plants that I was like, why is this not available at all the nurseries? It's so pretty. So there is a little bit of a kid in the candy store thing that goes on when I go through seed lists as well. I'm deciding to run a nursery gave me an excuse to order like probably altogether, I probably got about 75 packs of seeds from Prairie Moon Nursery this year. So quite a collection, and so lots of new to me plants. Do I fertilize plants after transplanting the plug trays? I don't. What I do is I did a while back got a container because some of the house plants were suffering. Actually, they were obviously suffering from nitrogen deficiency, and I got a container of it's Gaia. I give the full name in the blog post. It's just a 444 organic fertilizer. I have yet to find a really good, really organic, not just weirdly sourced from some other thing that technically qualifies as organic, but is sketchy, one that is actually vegan. So I will admit there in the Gaia one, it does have, I think there was blood meal in it. And a lot of the organic fertilizers don't liquefy very well. And if I spread it on the surface, I find that it can stimulate some mold issues and some other critter problems. So what I actually do now is I mix some of that dry powder fertilizer right into the potting soil. So when I mix it in, I wet the soil down as well a little bit when I'm ready to fill trays with it. So I usually try to wet it an hour or 2 before. Also that way I'm not breathing dust and spreading it in, or fill the trays with it. And so the fertilizer's right in there. It doesn't take all that much. They're really only spending about 6 weeks in those trays before they're going into nursery beds or even permanent gardens. Are you planting species other than wildflowers, example, ferns, sedges, small shrubs? So I'm starting a few shrubs. They're actually, I don't expect, they may end up being available in this year's sale. I expect some of them will be too slow. And I know the roses that I'm starting take 2 years to germinate. So I will be starting a few more shrub seeds. I am doing sedges, 3 species this year. Ferns are spores, and I've tried ferns before, and through a goof of taking because it's one of the few things you have to keep in an extremely high moisture environment for the spores to mature, start to turn into the green sort of plant, but then they actually have to like cross their genes with each other to actually get a plant. So you need a certain amount of available moisture. And so I had them in this lovely, it was actually just this reused like sushi, those containers you get sushi in. And they were fine under the lights, but when I was doing a space rearrangement, they ended up in the south instead of the north end of the house, in a spot that had some supplemental lighting but was relying on some light from the window, and they overheated and cooked because of the sunshine coming through the window. That was my so far one and only fern exercise. At some point I'll probably try ferns again, but they are a different creature. They're literally reproduced differently. So they're spores, not seeds. Favorite grasses and sedges for meadow. Actually, I sort of have this ongoing joke about people ask, what are your favorite plants? And I go, well, it depends on the spot. It depends on the day. I picked a bunch of species. I will they are in the spreadsheet, and I actually have in the spreadsheet, because grasses all have different botanical names, in the column off to the side, the ones that are grasses. Those are the ones that, based on the description, I thought would have a reasonable chance of thriving in garden settings, or at least meadowy settings, because a lot of my interest is, how do we reintroduce, or even sometimes it's a brand new introduction, native species into urban spaces, because our urban spaces are novel ecosystems. These do not exist prior to our creation of them. So we can't just copy an ecosystem. They do function, it is going to be a novel ecosystem, but we can introduce species that have traits that suggest that they have a high likelihood of success in an urban setting, with the different stresses, but also different benefits. Because frankly, we can make sure water is available. And also, one of the things about having roofs is water runs off of them. We could direct that into the landscape. So if you think about a typical urban lot, half the water falls on hard surfaces, most of that being the roof when it rains. So we can actually direct extra water into the landscape. So we actually have more water, more rainwater available in urban spaces than in the adjacent rural ones by area. We have some moderating of temperature fluctuations when we have a high cold, hot, cold. There's low predator loading, there's low grazer loading. There's various things that are different. And we can, rather than just sort of object to the differences and go and try to copy exactly what's going on, there are going to be some novel plant communities that come together. And so far, we've mostly just been using really narrow range of the possible native species when we plant native species in urban spaces. But there was actually an awesome Facebook post from Kathy. You know, I've stayed at her house. You'd think I'd know how to say her last name. It's Cavasalis, I think. She's one of the admins in the Ontario Master Gardeners group. And I think the post was just yesterday. If it wasn't yesterday, it was the day before. Actually, it's definitely yesterday, because she referenced a seminar that actually aired yesterday, which talks about loss of biodiversity because we don't plant certain plants. So there's plants that are native to an area. Some of them we incorporate in our landscape, some of them we end up not incorporating. And then we add non-native species and we go, look, there's greater total biodiversity. But that chunk that's non-native species, if we plant the same ones everywhere, which is what the horticultural industry has been doing for a long time, you might actually technically have more total diversity in a limited space, but you actually end up with less regional variation. So your total biodiversity on sort of an broader ecosystem standpoint actually is lower, because it's become much less diverse from space to space. So I'm trying to kind of go, can we make all of these species available to people so that we can try them out and actually find out how many can adapt to urban spaces, especially when we approach it going, what are their needs? Can we meet them here, as opposed to going, will you fit into my garden setting? So flipping the onus from them to adapting to us, providing as best we can in this novel ecosystem a space for them to thrive. And there's so many plants that could possibly be introduced into urban spaces that we just haven't, because there were so many other things at the garden center, and the attitude is shifting around that. So people are going, well, how can I get native plants? And I'm like, yeah, that's part of the problem, which is part of why I'm doing this. Yeah, somebody was saying they've been growing ferns and they're still 3 inches tall. Invasive jumping worm cocoons and commercial mix, which is forcing me to change potting mixes from triple mix cut with perlite to one that is just peat vermiculite. Really increases the cost. Yeah, I'm going to do another talk sometime on, I'm actually trying, and I'll really do the talk in the spring, because that's when I'll have the results. But I don't like buying a lot of potting soil, because I know it comes out of peat bogs, and I know the Canada peat bog situation is quite different than the European one, but it's still going out and mining something from another ecosystem. When in urban spaces, we have so much organic matter that's going to waste. How can we actually cycle more of this into growing things? So I do bokashi composting. But that's very wet when it comes out of the bucket. So it sort of pickles it, makes it fairly unappealing to most wildlife. So it does make it easier to put out into the garden, and it breaks down very fast once it's exposed to soil biology and microorganisms and that. But what I've been trying is actually, I have a tumbling composter, putting bokashi in that, adding about 50%, or like basically the same quantity of a dry high carbon additive. So I've done sawdust, I've done wood chip, like half composted mulch, like wood chip type mulch. So about half, that's already partially broken down. I've done, I actually just did packed a bunch of shredded documents because I've been cleaning my office in with some bokashi. So something to add some dry, high carbon material. You could use dry leaves. You could even use probably dry, like straw, all kinds of things. Goes in as long as it dries out and it's high carbon. And about 6 weeks in the tumbler, and it's a two-sided one, so I can sort of do 3 weeks to each side. Or like takes 3 weeks to fill a side and it's tumbling, and then the other one would be done at the end of 3 weeks and you empty it. So it's been working for the kitchen compost. And then I've been packing that into some pots with a little bit of extra sort of fine mulch, and that's gotten tucked into under the benches in the greenhouse to sort of finish the maturing of the biology over, you know, they started getting tucked in the summer. They're still sitting out there. They'll be frozen solid in these conditions. They'll thaw out a bit earlier than outside will. And then I'll actually screen them. And I'm going to try using a bunch of that. I may have to cut it with peat moss, but to lighten it up a little bit more. But I'll see. I might be able to use it straight up for growing in, because I do want to figure out how we can take urban waste products and convert it into something we can actually grow plants in urban settings. So I'm experimenting with some of that stuff. Do I think we'll keep the jumping worms out? Unfortunately, no. Do I think this winter might actually do something about them? Yes, but we won't have too many more of these really, really long cold freezes for, we can't rely on them. Do I work, somebody else asked, do I work with mycorrhizae fungal inoculants? Actually, the Pro Mix that I get actually already has that in it. So it's, the plants get it right from the start. And also, if you have healthy soil with a diversity of species and some natural layered compost going on, so chop and drop mulching, not hauling anything away, not clearing leaves off of anything other than like maybe a plant needs some pushed aside, you probably have a fair amount of mycorrhizae in your soils. So the garden probably doesn't need a lot of mycorrhizae. It's the highly disrupted spaces that often do. But if you've been nurturing the garden soil for a while, you probably actually have a fairly good soil complex of biology. But yeah, the potting soil comes with it these days. Pro Mix bought Mike for a reason. Yeah, somebody was saying, somebody was mentioned, Sean James mentioned he had success using fine pure compost as a potting mix. And also historically, that was actually fairly common. That's also where a lot of the talk of, if you read old British garden books, they'll talk about leaf mold. That's broken down leaves, and it's often mixed, it was often mixed with sand, and that was your potting soil. And they work just as well. What peat-based potting soils did for us is it gave us something that worked for everything. So we didn't have to adjust the mixes very much to fill massive, extensive greenhouses. We could fill all of the containers with the same thing or with just a little bit of variation. And it made it so that we could be less specific. We didn't have to pay attention to what specific plants needed. We could just give everybody the same thing and they were all fine. And that's the thing with potting soils, is there are other options. It's just, this was the one that was the easiest. And that's why it's really caught on. It didn't require much specialized knowledge of the needs. Have I moved forest soil into garden soil? I have transplanted some things from the forest to the garden, and they probably would have brought biology with them, because and I will end up doing, it'll only be for local, and I'll sort of ask in a couple of local groups who wants to come out, but I'm planning a house build starting in a little over a year, well, basically a year from spring, which means there's a footprint where the house will go. And there's a whole bunch of Pennsylvania sedge, because that's the primary ground cover in the forest. And this is sort of at the edge of the forest, that we'll be getting, there will be a call out for who wants to adopt sedges, and we'll dig them all out rather than having tractors disrupt them. So I have brought things in because I'm sort of keeping an eye on this area and going, okay, who needs to move? And there's no point in moving them to another spot in the forest because it's the same thing everywhere. So some of them have come into the city. Yeah, the paper fiber ones, I do wonder about some of the fungi issues, but they might, yeah, the paper fiber potting soils. Not saying there are fungi issues, that's just the question I would ask. And yeah, I've seen some bits about that one before, but yes, I agree. I think it's still only in the US. But yeah, we have so much organic matter in urban spaces. It's actually so dense here that we throw it away because it's hard to manage this much organic matter in this limited space. So somebody was sort of talking about what are the things we can do for the ecosystem, and one of the ones that was like a good entry level one, well, there's actually two. One is, well, I could even give you three. Learn about what species belong in your space, or likely can thrive, what native species used to or can likely thrive in the space you have access to, and try to care for them in that space. Try to gather seeds from plants that you make a commitment to care for and distribute them to other spaces those plants can thrive, because we've interrupted ecosystems so much that it's hard for plants to get around. And then the other is try to get the organic matter that's going to waste streams back to the ecosystem, because the ecosystem would really like to have it. What is waste is only waste because it's out of place. The place that belongs is being fed back to all biology, which will then cycle it a few times and then feed it back to the plants, which then will feed either us or all the other critters, and it just keeps cycling if we can do that. So let's move away from this trending towards, like, we have this aversion to decomposition. As a society, we don't like things that rot, and I'm like, rot is awesome. That's how you compost things, and they become new things. But yeah, we've got to the point where we will grind up and dehydrate our food waste and then call it compost. And like, that's not compost. You have to actually have decomposition for it to be compost. So don't buy one of those fancy new food dehydrator things. They take up energy, and they will eventually break, and then we'll need to manufacture more stuff and all these things. I'm like, just get a bokashi bucket, compost it. So yeah, this is one actually. Well done. I like your persistence, because you asked this in the last one. We ran out of time, and I actually was like, I wanted to get to that question. Is it okay to collect other people's bagged leaves from a different area, or is there a slight danger of bringing disease into your garden? So when it comes to tree leaves, because they're dropping is natural, sort of that senescence, they fall. It's not an indicator of disease, the fact that they're falling. It's their natural cycle. And a lot of disease issues actually will cause leaves to drop earlier. So your primary time that those are being sort of dropped, and silly people give them away. I know, because I loaded the back of my car full of them 3 times this fall when I asked in my local Buy Nothing group if anyone was getting rid of leaves. I got 3 carloads of leaves. I would move them around within limited range. So go to your neighbors, because any disease loading that's at your neighbors, diseases and pests can get around a certain amount on their own. You're not likely to actually be importing a pest that's not capable of getting to you already. I like to compost that stuff at first. So a lot of this goes into high disruption or annual areas, because it gives me the opportunity to deal with any seeds that come up. And actually, my favorite landscape use of buckthorn lot of you know what I'm talking about when I say buckthorn, is mulch. And people are like, but it's got seeds in it. And I'm like, yeah. And then it gets dumped down on my vegetable gardens and my paths through my vegetable gardens. And they germinate and I pull them up. And then the seeds are done. So I actually will gather all that stuff because it is organic matter that is extremely high value, and I'll use it to, especially when building new beds or prepping an area where I will have some attention on that area at the start. So if anything weird is going on, I can catch it. But as long as you're gathering locally, I really wouldn't worry that much about disease. We have this idea we can have sterile things, and I would actually rather have all of the biology, because most pathogens don't compete that well with the biology that partners with plants. So if you have all the biology and you have a mixed ecosystem, the disease loading is usually really kept suppressed, more so than if we try to minimize everything to reduce the disease loading, because then the only thing that survives is the thing that eats your plants. So somebody asking about if there's some plants to start with balance of popularity, difficulty, and success. Actually, Dennis, I'm going to ask you to do a follow-up to let me know, do you mean as a grower or as a brand new gardener?
As like a grower to
okay.
like look into.
Yes, because it's a different answer. My other is depends on the spot. Leaves from male cigar is the jumping. Yes, the question of the jumping worm issue. My thought with that is, are they really in the leaves that much? And do you just keep the, yes, so they can be in the leaf dust layer. I suppose where I come down to is we're not going to be able to keep our gardens in a bubble. And I don't know when it comes to the jumping worm issue where we're going to be at in a few years. I totally get it. The stress of it, and it's also why frankly the potential transfer of soil living critters is why part of the reason I'm not going to do the fall sale this year, because the spring sale it's all grown in container. Like I don't have to worry about accidentally spreading anything to anybody's gardens because it is growing in. At least this year, I'll see about composts in future years, but even then that's done in a tumbler and it goes right into pots. So it's not actually in the ground. Anything that was going to hatch usually would have had a chance to hatch and be spotted before it would go in the containers. But with the spring sale, it's all potting. This spring, it's all potting soil that comes out of peat bogs, and peat bogs are one of the few sterile things in an ecosystem. Because there are these oxygen-free weird environments. That's the reason it doesn't rot. So as far as beginner plants, I'm going to go to a cheat sheet here because there are lots of possibilities, and you're probably not the only one wondering this. So I'm going to try to give you a slightly more fulsome answer. I'm literally actually pulling up the spreadsheet that was the one linked in the blog. Yes, I actually would tend to agree that holding the leaves in the leaf bags probably would make a difference. So we're putting them into even a large tumbling composter in that, it would probably break it down enough that you could, the cocoons would start to hatch and you'd be able to spot if there was worms in there or not. So this is being recorded. I do plan to post it. So you don't have to write this fast. Any of the Agastache, the hyssops, the Annie's hyssop, giant purple hyssop, they're really easy. They're fast growing. Pearly everlasting's good, although the germination can be odd. Sometimes they germinate well, sometimes they don't. Wild columbine sells like crazy, the Aquilegia canadensis. The milkweed, swamp milkweed, common milkweed, orange butterfly milkweed, especially the swamp and the orange butterfly one. Some of these are new ones for me, so I want to see how they grow before saying, yeah, grow that.
What about the Rebecca varieties, like Green-Eyed Susan and all these?
So there's 3 native Rebecca's. There's Rebecca hirta, which is widely native in the area. That's the classic black-eyed Susan. There is a there's the tall, the lance leaf, the green-eyed, or is it the gray-headed or green-headed coneflower is what it goes by. It's the Rudbeckia lanceolata. There is a third one. You can find it on Vastcan, and it's one that the little Susie cultivar comes from, that looks like a shorter version of the I'm trying to give you the name of the wrong one, and I don't want to let it out of my teeth because it's the other one. The one, the Goldstrom. The Goldstrom comes from this is the shorter version that looks like the same species as Goldstrom, but its range extends into Ontario. They've been sort of detangling some of these species, but the most common ones you'll find as native will be the Rudbeckia hirta and the Rudbeckia lanceolata. There are no echinaceas that are native to Ontario. I'm not anti-growing echinacea, but it's just a good thing to know. Fireweed is actually really pretty as a garden plant. The Coreopsis, definitely Coreopsis lanceolata. I'm also trying Tripteris, which is a tall one, but it's my first year for that. The asters in general, the flat top white aster is really nice. The Dahlingeria umbellata. I was surprised how popular fleabanes turned out to be when I posted about them, and I know when the seed library had lots of them go, but I haven't tried selling them. I'll try that this year though. Asters in general are usually a fairly good bet. Oh, prairie smoke. Well, everybody wants prairie smoke. That's one people ask for a lot. The hibiscus, the swamp rose mallow, that one is a good seller, and it grows crazy fast from seed. Liatris in general will sell quite well. Cardinal flower, you can sell pretty much as many as you grow. The great blue lobelia is also a good reliable one. The bee balm, so Monarda's, red bee balm, wild bergamot, spotted horse mint are also pretty reliably popular. Switchgrass, if you're going to grow, that's one enough people are familiar with, that they're not scared by it, and it's clump forming. Any of the penstemons, now there's actually not as many native to Ontario. The digitalis, the foxglove beard tongue is actually considered introduced. I still grow it, but I can call it a near native. Virginia mountain mint is a good one. Yeah, we already mentioned the Rudbeckias. Little blue stem is another good, widely recognized grass, so people are comfortable trying it out. If you're going to grow goldenrods, blue stem and zigzag are non-intimidating for people because they don't look like the regular goldenrod, the Canada goldenrod. Another one that is, I found people were willing to sort of give it a chance was gray goldenrod, because it's actually quite small. It doesn't spread quickly. So yeah, the asters, the heart-leafed aster is great for shade. Actually, all the years being a perennial plant designer, garden designer, and you know, what can you get for flowering in the shade? Fall flowers in the shade, and it's like you're always struggling. And some of the astilbes were kind of okay. Zigzag goldenrod, blue stem goldenrod, heart-leafed aster, all native, all tolerant of dry shade, and so easy to grow. It's just like, I don't understand why they're not really common garden plants, because they're gorgeous at the end of the season. And yeah, the heath aster is another good one for hot, dry sites. Yeah, asters in general. I'm trying to think. The vervains, blue vervain, it's really pretty, grows up fast, blooms the first year. Ironweeds, if people have a tall spot, there's like where they can handle a 6 or 8 foot plant. Ironweeds are stunning when they're in bloom. And Culver's root, the Veronicastrum virginicum. Those are all pretty reliable ones to start with. They're fairly reliable from seed. they're recognizable, they're pretty enough that people are comfortable. Yeah, Joe Pieweed, somebody mentioned. I probably scrolled past it too fast and did as I was going down the list. Bone Set is also fairly big one. Yeah, so yeah, I had the spreadsheet on that. It's literally a spreadsheet and it's a Google sheet and it's linked in the blog. All right, I'll just sort of do a couple closing things, and then if people want to hang around and keep asking me some more questions, that's fine. I'm not in a hurry to go away. I am going to do another sort of Q&A conversation in about 2 weeks. Well, in exactly 2 weeks. I've already made a link, although I'm going to have to deal with a little bit of stuff. Somebody was spamming some weird external link where they were going to like live stream my talk without my permission, and all of the Facebook info on how to ban somebody from your page, they haven't updated any of the help things, and everything they tell you how to do it doesn't work. So I've got to do a bit of digging. I will have an event. I may end up requiring you to register through Eventbrite to avoid that spam thing going on. So people can't weirdly want to steal my talk. I don't know. It's odd. But anyway, there will be another one in 2 weeks, and it's going to be about ecologically regenerative services. I actually gave it a name. Why don't I actually pull up the file or the name of it so you can actually find the event. See, I have a 30-second memory sometimes. I actually gave the event its name. You'd think I could remember what it was. But the idea of it, page is being slow. It's because I'm live streaming as well. There we go. Ecological gardening service models. Because not only do I want people to be able to grow and sell native plants, I'd like people to actually be able to provide professional services helping people create gardens that are ecologically friendly in ecologically regenerative ways. So there's some things, some of you have heard me yammer on about them as I've worked through ideas. I'm actually putting together a couple of short videos, which I will share links to over the next 2 weeks as I get them done and ready for publishing into the event information, because I think there's the demand for and need for people to support the conversion or the shift from sort of the dominant limiting sort of approach to horticulture and sort of the make the landscape be the thing we decided we wanted to be, to the how do I help the space thrive. I think the interest is there, but there's a lot of people who are struggling to do it and to figure out how, and even how do we go about making a garden without extracting soil from another ecosystem? It's gotten so normal, that's what we do now. And I'm like, no, there's other ways of doing it. So I'm going to put together a couple of little videos that are actually meant for sharing for people who want to be offering services in better ways, and to let people know that this is a better way of doing things from an ecological standpoint. And also to toss out some other possibilities that have occurred to me, because I do think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done in creating urban ecosystems. And I think people are spending $8 billion a year on making ornamental horticultural spaces in our country. So let's make healthy horticultural spaces in our country, and direct that $8 billion a year towards paying people to do this work. So some business model offerings that I think are actually viable and could actually suit what people are looking for. So there's a bunch of thank yous. I'm not seeing any more questions. You're very welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see that there's so much interest in this. And hopefully I'll see some of you next week. There will be general information. So even if you're like, I'm not going to be a business person, I will be talking about how you make gardens in ways that is actually good for the ecosystem as opposed to extracting from other ecosystems, and also some of the things around how you care for them in the long run. Because I think there are people who want to do that in their own space, and then there's probably a lot of people who are like, I love the idea, I don't have time for this, I don't have the energy for this, or I am not comfortable that I know it well enough to actually do this. Those are the people who would love to hire someone to help them. I'll talk about both sides of it in next week's talk. All right. Any final questions before I close the meeting down officially? No. All right. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday afternoon.